When we first moved into our house a few months ago, we noticed there's an awkward wall that was just begging for a cute credenza. I've had my eye on this Lulu Georgia credenza for a while now, but it's about a foot too wide for this wall, and it has a price tag of $2,200, which is a little bit more than I wanted to spend. So I set out to make my own version for less. Can it be done? Let's find out. Okay, so I wanted to talk about my approach to building this for a minute. Even though I studied mechanical engineering, I never really got to play around with woodworking tools, so I wanted to try to make this thing completely from scratch so that I could learn as much as possible. Because of this, I totally avoided doing something like an IKEA hack. To figure out how we were going to build it, we made a CAD model that had the rough dimensions. It wasn't perfect, but I wanted to make sure we had the right proportions on the height, width, and the door arches in particular, since these are probably the most important design feature. Even though we're building it from scratch, the cost of wood really adds up. Because of this, I ended up deciding to make this mostly out of poplar. We chose poplar because it's a less expensive hardwood. It can be prone to blotchiness, but I ended up doing some test stains on some small planks of poplar to gain confidence in what the final product would look like. Oh, by the way, you might have noticed the stain isn't black like the original credenza. I took some artistic liberty here and decided to go with a white stain, as I think it would better suit the overall vision I have for this room. For this build, I'm going to break it down into smaller steps. First, I'm going to start off with the sides and center structure, then the top, bottom, and back faces, then the doors, and finally details like the cane and hardware. Let's get to it. Step 1. The sides and center structure. These vertical posts that I'm pointing to right here are 3x3 laminated pieces of poplar. They do sell poplar posts in the right size off the shelf, but they're a lot more expensive than DIYing it yourself. So we decided to laminate 3 pieces together ourselves. It was easier than expected. We used wood glue to adhere the pieces together and clamp them together to dry. We cut them to the correct length, then we used our table saw to make sure the edges were flat. Once we had the 30-inch posts complete, we routed a 1/4-inch wide channel, which will be used to hold the panels. We tried freehanding the grooves at first, which was a complete disaster.
There are no mess ups.
No.
No.
Yeah, no mess ups.
I don't see anything
No.
wrong there.
So then we ordered an edge guide on Amazon and had much straighter results with that. I'll link the one we used below. We cut the rails to length and drilled pocket holes, which were used to assemble them to the posts. We added a lip out of less expensive wood for the bottom to rest on. Then we slid in the panels. We added supports so that we had something for the top piece to fasten to. We repeated this for the other side. Also repeated for the center structure, minus the router grooves and panels. Now we're ready to fabricate the top and bottom pieces. To make the top, we glued 2 pieces of poplar together edge to edge and clamped it in our makeshift jig until it dried. Then trimmed it to the correct width. Same for the length. We used a similar process for the bottom panel, but we used pine instead of poplar to save money because it won't be visible from the outside.
It's okay. We'll figure it out.
We cut notches in the bottom for the posts and assembled. We were so excited to see the frame actually in our house, so we brought it inside. And it's a good thing we did because we realized at that point that we'd made a disastrous mistake. We accidentally made it too wide. I realized I had measured the width along the baseboard, making the 68-inch width too wide for the wall. We knew it would drive us nuts if we left it as is, so we made the painful decision to disassemble and shorten it. Once we shortened the length of the frame, we cut a piece of 1/4-inch plywood to fit on the back of the frame. We nailed the plywood to the frame. This made it more rigid and structurally sound. For this next part, I'm going to talk about how we built the doors. The first thing that we did was cut strips of poplar into the general shape of the door. Laying it out like this helps reduce scrap and ultimately save money. Once we had the strips cut, we moved on to gluing them up. Since we're laminating 6 pieces together, we had to do these in multiple stages. If we had more clamps, we could have probably done it in one shot, but we made do with our limited resources. Trimming the arch was more of a challenge than we were expecting. Since the arches are such an important design element in the finished look, I wanted to make sure we got them perfect. So we made a circle jig, but it didn't work as expected.
Oh my god, really?
The jigsaw blade would end up bending, resulting in an edge that was not square.
I mean, you could see, like, if you look down, you could see how it's, like, vertical here. And it slowly drafts, you know?
Believe it or not, we ended up freehanding the arch with our jigsaw, and it turned out pretty good in my opinion. The vertical and horizontal pieces on the doors were too wide, so we had to rip them down to 2 inches with the table saw. We mocked up the pieces and trimmed them down as needed. Once we were happy with the lengths, we drilled pocket holes and assembled. At this point, we were so excited to have a couple door frames, so we started mocking them up. It felt like we were almost done, but in reality, we still had a long way to go. Step 4. And now the fun part, installing the cane webbing. I cut a piece of cane, making sure it was longer than the length of the door arch. Then I filled a cooler with warm water to soak the cane for about 20 or 30 minutes. This makes it more pliable for installation, and when it fully dries, it should make the webbing more taut. After soaking and patting it dry, I spray painted the front, aka the glossy side, white. It's important to leave the untreated side alone because it'll suffocate your cane if you paint both sides and cause it to dry up. As soon as the paint was dry, it was time to install it on the door. I placed the door face down and set the cane on top of the door. I lined it up, then held the cane taut as Joe stapled across each edge. You might have to take out some staples and redo them, like we did, if it doesn't lay flat.
The next morning.
The next day it felt dry and taut, and I was really surprised that you couldn't really see the staples unless you looked closely. Here's what they look like in case you're curious. So I went ahead and trimmed the excess cane, glued down the edges, then clamped it down until the glue dried. It's worth noting that this method resulted in imperfect results. Before starting this project, I researched various articles on how to install cane, which led me to this method. But something went wrong. We noticed that the cane would loosen up with changes in humidity. So I consulted with Cane & Basket, the small Los Angeles-based store where I purchased the cane, to determine what happened, which I should have done in the first place. They suggested waiting until the cane is fully dry before gluing the edges, which it may not have been. They also suggested waiting to spray paint the cane until after it's installed in the doors and fully dry. In the end, I'm not 100% sure what caused this issue, but I wanted to share our mistakes with you in case you want to do a project with cane webbing. After getting over that hiccup, we installed all the hardware, moved it into our house, and styled it to satisfy all my boho dreams. And finally, here's our finished credenza. Now let's tally up the cost to find out if I was able to make it cheaper than the original Lulu Georgia Islay Sideboard, which has a price tag of $2,399. Adding all the materials up, I get a grand total of $514.62, making it less than 1/4 the price of the original and saving me about $1,884. It's not perfect, but I'd say the experience I gained was well worth it. It was a lot of trial and error, but it also resulted in a lot of savings, and most importantly, a lot of learning. What did you think about this project? Good? Bad? Let me know in the comments below.